This is The Data Slice, hosted by the Data Science Alliance. It's where we sit down to talk all things data science, AI, and tech, any way you slice it. I'm Callan Hopman, and joining us today is Paul Armstrong. We are super excited to have you here on the podcast. A little bit about you, but then I'll let you really tell your story. A couple fun things about Paul. He served actually over 20 years in the Navy as a supply corps officer and chaplain before transitioning to social services. He was the Social Services Director at the Salvation Army and the Chief Programs Officer on San Diego's Regional Task Force on the Homeless before becoming VP of Programs at the San Diego Rescue Mission in 2020, where you are now. Super excited to have you tell us all about that. I know your educational background spans from political science and business to divinity and social work, so I'm just intrigued to have you tell us how it all ties together now. But first off, how are you? Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here. I've fallen in love with data. So when it was an opportunity to talk about this, they joke with me at work that I'm the data guy, and so
It's your thing.
yeah, it's my thing, and everyone knows that. So super excited to be able to spend time. Yeah, I've been very grateful for the opportunities I've got in my life. So yeah, originally from New Mexico. I always joke that the Navy tricked me and said they were going to expand the Rio Grande and put a Navy base there. They didn't. Yeah, so I had to move away.
Maybe
and
someday.
Yeah, so I had the opportunity after I graduated from college to spend some time in the Navy, and then super opportunities did come up. I've been thankful for the educational opportunities because I get it. Not everyone gets the chance to get a master's degree, and I did, and it has been incredibly helpful. So I started off getting my MBA while I was a supply corps officer because that just really helped me and informed as kind of looking at a logistics and business side. And then I did get the chance. I transitioned off of active duty and was a pastor. Earned my Master's of Divinity, and so yeah, my second Master's. Just so you know, my wife will not allow me to go back to school. She said after my third
Two was
master,
your max.
no, it's because we're not done yet. Yeah,
The story continues.
Yeah, the story continues. So I had the opportunity, got my Master's of Divinity, which enabled me to transition back on active duty and finish out my 20 years as a Navy chaplain. And then as I was looking at what would be next, I was, well, all right, I would love to get into the social service area. I am a person of faith, so for me, being able to bridge the faith community into the general community is something I want to do. And so I had my Master's of Divinity, which gave me credibility in the church. And so Masters of Social Work gives me credibility in the community.
It works well.
Yeah, so there you go. Off to my third master's degree, to which my wife said no more. But then really was able to thankfully retire in beautiful San Diego, which is amazing. Super appreciative for my time at the Salvation Army. That really did allow me to transition. So yes, everyone jokes I went from the Navy to the Army.
Not the typical.
Yeah, I know, and I still do say go Navy, beat Army, just so you know.
You have to.
Yeah, have to. But then, yeah, just an incredible opportunity to really be in that transition period. Appreciative of, while it was a short time, a great opportunity at the Regional Task Force on Homelessness to be able to see at a highest level within our continuum of care, which is what we call the oversight for homeless services in our area. Gave me some great perspective, and then had the opportunity to roll into the San Diego Rescue Mission. It's just been a blast. We've gotten an opportunity to really expand our impact and our services. And so would love to be out of a job, frankly. But until that happens, excited for the team that I get to work with and the opportunity to make a difference.
Yeah. So for people who might not know, could you talk a little more about the rescue mission and kind of what the work you guys do is?
Yeah, so we have a very rich history coming up on 75 years in the
Wow.
San Diego area. And so it started out as a little soup kitchen, and which many rescue missions. So across the country, there's rescue missions in most cities. And a lot of them started off with a meal, and they would feed people, and someone would get up and preach. And over the course of time, they said, we see the same people. Maybe we need to do more than just a meal. And so that turned into being able to offer some shelter. And then we really realized, how can we actually have an approach that is holistic in how we're addressing this? And so it starts off for us. We start off with outreach. We have some incredible outreach workers that work in Little Italy. So if you're ever in Little Italy and you go, wow, seems like there's something happening around homelessness, give us a shout out? No, but and then we also get the privilege of doing outreach in both Vista and Oceanside. And then we've been leveraging a shower trailer, and as we've been expanding, we got to do some incredible work with National City, Chula Vista, Imperial Beach, the South Bay area. And so that's our starting point is let's do outreach. Let's meet them where they're at on the street. We take a really relational approach just to be able to try and connect with them, see them, let them know that they have dignity and worth, and then hopefully start a conversation that can help them get off the street. Our next stage for us is then we have low barrier shelter, and all a low barrier shelter means is how can I remove as many barriers as possible so you'll say yes and you'll come inside. And so we operate two low barrier shelters called lighthouses. One's up in Oceanside, and then the other is in National City, our South County Lighthouse. And so in Oceanside, we call it our North County Lighthouse. And so lighthouses are just that. We want them to be beacons of hope. We get someone off the street immediately, and it's about triage at that point. So remember the classic show MASH, right? That's what they were doing is they came in, they triaged, and then they got them to their next level of care. And so our team does an incredible job of helping people get connected. And for some, what they really need is a structured, holistic program. And that's our flagship program, which is called Mission Academy, which is a year-long holistic program. We use an academic model. So when people come into our lighthouses, we call them guests. So we like to treat them like they're our guests, and we want them to feel like, oh, wow, this is great. And they come to Mission Academy, they said, I want to roll up my sleeves and get to work. So we call them students. We have classes, we have structure. We're working with them to address the things that led them into homelessness. And then we're able to celebrate them twice a year at graduation. And then we have a robust alumni program for our Mission Academy graduates, because one of the things we know is just when you hear their stories, we just want them to feel empowered to go and impact the community. And then also when it comes to connecting with someone who's on the street, there's no better voice than someone who's been on the street who can say, hey, I was there, no longer there. And they get to do that. And again, we are a faith-based organization. So for our outreach and our lighthouse, all of the stuff we do around faith is voluntary. Mission Academy, that is our faith-based program. You come there, you're going, hey, I actually want not only a structured program, but I want a faith-based program. And so that's what we get to do every day. And so it's, again, super grateful for the opportunity to lead an incredible team that gets to do that work.
Yeah. Well, 75 years, that's crazy.
Yeah.
You guys have been in the community for a very long time.
Yeah.
I know you've been with the organization for a couple years now, and you said you are the data guy. So diving into that a little bit, could you talk about, now that we kind of know the type of work you're doing, could you talk about how data plays a role with that and kind of how you and your team use it?
Yeah, right. And so I'm going to pick on us not-for-profits a little bit if I can. One of the things is that we recognize we are predominantly privately funded, right? So we're constantly out there. We have an incredible team that's trying to encourage the community to give to us. And people love stories. And right, stories, if I showed you a pie chart or if I told you a story, what's going to prick your heart and make you want to give? A story. And it's easy then as a not-for-profit to become so focused on stories that you kind of lose sight on data, right? Or you just don't build in the intentionality around data. And you rely too much on stories. And so to pick on us, when I first started, that's where we were at. And so we had the opportunity to start asking some questions and really starting to go, what is our actual impact? How are we seeing people be transformed by our programming? Because really, right, that if you have data, it gives you the chance to be able to go, is this piece of our programming working or not? And if it's working, then you add more resources to it. If it's not, then you go, well, why are we doing it? And what we were finding is that we were over relying on stories, and we were sub-performing in some of our programming. And so we started measuring, and we started asking questions. And then what was incredible is we got to see our success rates start to increase. Because one of the things I like to share within the homeless services and anything that's a structured program, there are some people that it doesn't matter what your programming is, they're done with experiencing homelessness and they're going to be successful because they for whatever reason something clicked on that and for them. For a lot of other folks, everyone has the potential to be successful, but because of trauma, because of past experiences, they really need some guidance. And by leveraging data to check the quality of our outcomes and our performances, we're able to take other folks who would have failed previously and now make them successful, right? Because they're actually now getting to our programming is actually addressing that trauma. Our programming is actually addressing the barriers that they have in a way that creates smaller steps for them, baby steps that let them take additional steps to move forward. So that's really what it was. It was our outcomes. So we really started using data just to evaluate our outcomes, evaluate our expectations, see in some areas, like unfortunately, I don't control how much housing is built in San Diego, and that's that's one of our barriers. But being able to see trends, being able to see where people are able to go, highlighting the need for behavioral health services. So first data for outcomes, then data to show service gaps, ways where we need to get better connected with the community resources. So that again, all of that's doing is it's enhancing our programming so that we're more effective.
So it sounds like a lot of your data is internal, your own data that you're analyzing.
Yeah, yes, it is. Yeah,
Okay.
so we have a great software platform that we leverage known as Mission Tracker, a great team that really has helped us, some of the good old-fashioned stuff that happens in social work, which is called logic models, where you're actually mapping things out and then really asking ourselves, what are we measuring that can then produce our outcomes?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a moment where you really saw that impact? You kind of had a moment of, wow, the fact that we were able to do that and analyze the data and make decisions with that really affected
Yeah.
things?
Oh, yeah. So there's been a couple of ways that because and it's nothing like I wouldn't say there was a aha that the ocean did not part and light did not. Um, but what it did is it created by looking at data, it created a growth mindset within our organization. And so one of the areas we saw that for our Mission Academy was in our classes. So I would, and again, pick on us a little bit again, is when I first got there going, and it felt like our classes were because we wanted to say we were offering classes.
Mm.
As our team was looking at the impact of those classes, they started getting better curriculum, having higher standards for our instructors, evaluating how the students were experiencing those classes, and now it's amazing. It's one of those things where I'm excited, and I get more excited because they're on this upward trajectory for that. For our children and how we were serving children, we were really looking at areas and realizing how critical it was for us to partner with the school system. And so really thankful that the San Diego Unified School District has been an incredible partner in helping us both get our families reconnected to school. A lot of times families experiencing homelessness are disconnected, and then they need some extra help. They need individual development plans. They need things that are individual education plans. They need tools because they've experienced a lot of chaos and trauma in their lives, and then plop them in the classroom and ask them to sit still for 6 hours doesn't always work.
Yeah.
And so through looking at the programming quality of how we were serving families, enabled us to create a partnership that is really the quality of care that we know our families are getting and the integration that's happening with the school system to help them been incredible.
Mhm.
At our lighthouses, really being able to have a clarion call around what's needed with behavioral health. What are the dynamics? What are the barriers that we're seeing? What are we able to do? And then what does that look like to network better with behavioral health? What are some of the trends? And where are we seeing just things where we're getting stuck as we try and serve someone who maybe has a severe mental illness or substance use disorder? So those are, yeah, and I could probably keep going on,
Mhm.
but I that's what we see. So each area of our programming is just a constant evolution. With our alumni, one more, our alumni, we do a randomized survey every quarter to check on them on a crisis to thriving scale to be able to go All right, how are they doing? What are trends are we seeing so that we can be providing additional support for those who've left our programming? And I could keep going on. So much stuff there. But yeah, so that's just
Yeah,
a small snapshot into how we use data.
definitely. I know you use the word evolution, technology, all of this, is constantly evolving.
Mhm.
How have you seen, over the course of time, over several years, how have you seen the usage of data kind of grow and change?
My hope, and I'm going to actually step back in history so that hopefully for social services, we can really start to chart a way forward. So I don't know if you remember the book Power of Habit. So it actually came
Mm,
out in 2012, and Charles Duhigg. And in 2012, he told the story about how Target was able to use data to identify if a person was pregnant or not. And in his book, he has this great story where a dad calls him up because he's furious because Target has started targeting ads, maternity ads to his teenage daughter. And what were they thinking? Only to have to call back 2 weeks later to apologize because sure enough, his teenage daughter was pregnant.
mm,
And I say that to go, okay, so in 2012, corporate America was using data in such a way to see trends and get ahead of things. We should be doing that. And there has been some incredible work. One of the things I got to do when I was at Salvation Army was actually work with 211 and looking at, is there ways, some predictive modeling around prevention. So like one of the best ways for me to go out of work, and I want to be out of work, is if we prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place. And there's been some data, some opportunities where they've been able to leverage metadata, trends that they're seeing within a population to target resources towards people who are more likely to become homeless and therefore
mm.
aim prevention resources there. Um, we need to be doing way more of that. The leveraging of that metadata, that longitudinal data. One of the things we're doing right now is we're actually currently working with 211, and they have what's known as the Community Information Exchange, so that we can be sharing data, so we can start to look at some longevity data. So again, I don't just want to see my short-term success, but are there ways where we can go, okay, actually long-term, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we see that someone who came through our programming is thriving. Also, then again, I think there's so much more we could be doing on the prevention side. How do we catch people beforehand? How do we go when someone becomes homeless, they first started interacting with these social services. In the program I got to do with them was at Salvation Army, they did do a longitudinal study, and what they found is we used some evidence-based practices around how to screen, and so then we provided the intervention because we didn't have enough resources to help everyone who qualified. 211 was able to then track over a period of time those who received the services and those who didn't. Those who received the services were 6 times less likely to become homeless.
Wow.
Right, so that's data that you can work with and use,
Hmm.
and we need to be doing that across. So yes, where my data a lot of times is internal, how my processes I'm keeping my eye on and trying to integrate with some of the larger data systems, because I think there's ways that we can be doing some predictive modeling, we can be doing some longitudinal studies of effectiveness that will only make us more effective.
For using data like that, are there challenges that you think organizations like yours are facing that, could maybe be prevented or solved somehow?
Yeah, right. So there's a couple of pieces, right? And so one is we do, and I know I get a chance to talk a little on ethics. Is we are talking about individuals, and so we're talking about vulnerable individuals, right? The population we serve would be what's known as a vulnerable population. It's not uncommon for us to have seniors within that population experiencing homelessness. And what that means, and we have, of course, I mentioned we serve families, so we have children. So when you think of data privacy and data, what we can't do is just become Big Brother looking in on
Yeah.
everyone. And so how are we creating trust networks so that any information that's shared about an individual person is being protected in a way that is ethical, but then still also guides in policy decisions. So I think that's at a macro level, one of the things that we have to be mindful of. At the micro level, or at the organizational level, this is one of the things that I found. You talk to anyone who works in a not-for-profit organization, and they're never going to say, we have too much money and we have way too much time. Like we have so many extra staff members just sitting around, just wondering what to do. And why that's important is that the workload can just cause you to start to you can lose sight of the importance of capturing data and data quality because there's so many urgent things that you got to do right now. So many fires you got to put out today. And then you're are usually understaffed. You're constantly making sure you have all the resources. And it was fascinating because, again, in my own journey, I saw when we were doing great on data, and then we started to slip, and I had to step back and go, oh, I was starting to get caught up in all of the urgencies of all the stuff going on. And I had to recommit. And so I think it really is in the social service sector, that commitment to data, you have to double down on that because it will be really easy to let all of the other stuff take over. And then again, our power is in our story. And then we go back to just simply storytelling and not using data to inform, plus the stories. We still need the stories, and the stories are incredible. Stories are what keeps our cups full. Our staff is filled up by the stories that we get to see and tell. But that has to have an underpinning of data. And then, as I mentioned, we got to start doing better from a longitudinal standpoint.
I know you mentioned the ethics of it, touched on it a bit there of how it is people, these are people's lives and especially vulnerable people. So what are some steps that you think in general are important or maybe that your team take to ensure the data is being used for good, but also, being used responsibly and ethically?
Yeah, and I think within I mentioned the continuum of care, and that's what oversees all of the homeless services within our region. We use a shared database called the Homeless Management Information System, HMIS. And so there's a trust network. So a couple pieces is you actually have to get training around that. And then you have to maintain certain standards to protect that privacy. 211, similar, very same construct for the community information exchange. So step one is always having a trust network where everyone is agreeing to a certain set of data standards and are trained on privacy, are trained on it. For example, within the COC, I'll never email a person's name. They have a unique identifier in HMIS, so I'll send along a number so that the only other person who will know what that is someone who can log into HMIS. So you have to have that. And then you also have to be thinking about who has access to the data. Um, so, for example, this is one of those tension points is, law enforcement. Well, law enforcement is out there. Oftentimes, law enforcement is part of the homeless outreach. So many cities have law enforcement that's doing what's known as a hot team or a homeless outreach team. We don't necessarily want police officers looking at our HMIS data. And that's because we're trying to build trust. And sometimes some of the people we serve do have warrants. Sometimes some of our people are justice involved. And if they knew that the police were going to be looking at those records, they're not going to trust us as much and they're not going to share as much information. And so it's both who's in the trust network, but then as more importantly, who are we going to maybe go, hey, again, it's not like we're allowing lawlessness in all our homeless service system. It's being able to go, let's have clear lanes. And so I'm in this trust network because I'm a service provider who's helping a person figure things out. Other parts of our community, whether that's law enforcement, whether it's other social service agencies, they have their role. And so keeping clear lanes and expectations so that the only people in the trust network of that data are people who are going to help move the person forward in whatever that conglomeration of data is being used for, whether that's the social service system in 211 or the homeless service system in HMIS.
So we've talked a lot about data. Another big part of data science and what it ties into is AI. So how have you seen AI tie into all of this work?
Fascinating. So, and one of the things we'll get a chance to talk a little bit later is so our data platform that we are using, they're actually playing around with AI in case management and how can that be a resource and a tool. And very specific, so there's a couple of pieces with that, because when you integrate AI into a client service model, privacy becomes even more important, because you don't want the AI learning off of someone's data, especially if they've not consented to their data being
Yeah.
mined and some AI learning. They've been doing some incredible work to go, but there is powerful tools in AI. And very specifically for us, one of our evolutions is being able to start to leverage some things that's coming through the Medi-Cal system, the program called CalAIM. But with that, then we would be billing some Medi-Cal providers. And so a homeless service provider doesn't know how to write notes the way a medical provider would write a note that can then be turned around and billed. So it was incredible. We were doing a working group with our software platform, and he was actually able to take a standard case note from one of our case managers, threw it through AI to make it a billable note that we could then turn around and give to a Medi-Cal provider. And it was fascinating. And so that ability, but even more so than looking at AI, this is some of the stuff they're looking at. Can AI go through all of the notes we have around an individual and maybe potentially produce some trend lines or produce data or produce thoughts that we hadn't caught or connect data points that maybe will help us identify someone who's higher risk for relapse or higher risk for some other thing that's going to get them tripped up in the path that they're going. So it's been interesting to see our software provider really starting to look at how to intelligently use AI, while at the same time managing some of the risk around AI from a privacy standpoint.
Yeah, could you talk a little more about the privacy risks, and do you kind of see that conversation progressing? Like we already said, this tech keeps growing, it feels like every day. So
Yeah.
how do you see those conversations kind of evolving regarding the responsibilities of it?
Yeah, that's right. So, because it really, again, it's going to go back to the importance of consent, and also then thinking through the power dynamic. So we all laugh and joke that we know our phone's listening to us, right? We've all had the experience of we're talking about something, and then sure enough, we see an ad for it. We're like, oh,
Yeah.
my phone's listening to me. But as a general rule, there's not necessarily a power dynamic unless we think Google and Apple are trying to take over our lives, which that's for a different podcast. But when you're in a shelter, you don't have a lot of power, and you're very reliant upon the shelter provider. You're reliant on a social service system, and it makes it very difficult to really feel like you do have autonomy. And so one of the things we can do, because we believe people, need to be able to feel like they can make choices and that they are an active participant in whatever's happening to their life. And so when we talk about privacy within this sector, it really is about our obligation to protect someone who may not feel that they can speak up. One of the tools we use, I didn't get a chance to talk with, is a program called Pulse for Good, and it actually is a kiosk that we put in all of our facilities to allow anonymous feedback. Because again, we know people that are in these types of situations, which we say is a vulnerable position, often feel the power dynamic. They're often fearful to speak up. And so being able to go, then that's our responsibility to go, are we putting things in place that are protecting their privacy, that are protecting their autonomy, that their data isn't just getting eaten up and learned and being used in a way that they legitimately did not get to consent to. And it goes back to as much as I can joke about Google listening to me, I have a Google Pixel, but that's because I went to the store, I bought the phone, I choose
Right.
what apps I download on my phone,
Hmm.
and I have a lot of power in my relationship with my phone. Some of the people we serve don't have those same opportunities, and so we then need to make sure that we're protecting them so that they feel like they are empowered.
That's a really good comparison for sure. Are there any trends or, certain direction that you see all of this headed or really hope to see it headed? I know you talked a
Yeah.
little already about some hopes you have for it.
Yeah, and I think it is. One of the things that we would say the data does is data does allow us our worlds to get more integrated, right? Right now we can be global pretty quickly, and we know that there's ways for different systems to talk to each other. And so one of the interesting areas that I'm hopeful for is that medical, so when we think about the medical system, they have recognized the cost of homelessness. Now, yes, it's horrifically costly on the individual. So let's start there. The true cost is that a person experiencing homelessness, their life expectancy is anywhere 10 to 20 years lower than the average person. The damage done on the human body and sleeping on a sidewalk, their chronic health issues, all of the physical issues. So the person bears a horrific cost. Unfortunately, oftentimes, sometimes in our culture, if it doesn't impact the bottom line, we don't get as concerned with it. Well, this is expensive,
Hmm.
and the medical system recognizes it. The chronic nature of those health conditions, the number of ER visits, and so what you've really seen is a push to go, how can we get some of the medical resources actually targeted and directed towards people experiencing homelessness so that we can get ahead of some of these chronic health issues and actually potentially save money on the healthcare system. And so there's an initiative, again, it comes through Medi-Cal, which is our Medicaid program here in the state, called CalAIM. And it's designed around the Medi-Cal providers being able to offer additional services and resources. And so that's one of the things we're now trying to integrate. It's fascinating because you get to see different systems at work. And so one of the ways I've always talked about it is got to realize, and this isn't just Medi-Cal, but the Health and Human Services budget for the state of California. It's been a little while since I've looked at it, so don't quote me too hard on this. $200 billion. The state spend about $2 billion on homelessness. So when you talk about budget size, the way I always talk about this is it's kind of like when Walmart rolls in someplace, and if you're a mom and pop hardware store, Walmart's like, hey, we can work with you so that you can still be here in our shopping plaza, but we're Walmart. We're not really going to change. And,
Hmm.
and so as CalAIM, as the Medi-Cal providers are like, hey, we want to help out with homeless services. They're like, and we're not going to change. So it's the homeless service system that's having to figure out how do we integrate into these medical processes? How do we integrate into medical billing? Been fascinating, but right, because from a data perspective, how do our systems talk to each other? How can we learn some lessons? So again, when we talk about healthcare, a lot of good research around preventative care, around wellness, around all of the things that help us be healthy. Okay, like there's things we can learn. And there's ways we can integrate healthcare services into our homeless service system. And I think that is going to be phenomenal. And that's where we're trying to work towards. And that's some of our current stuff is as I mentioned, we're figuring out how to build in CalAIM billing within our software platform, working with Medi-Cal providers so that we can really have an understanding so that we don't duplicate services, but we actually have an integrated system of both homeless services and a healthcare system.
For other organizations or maybe an individual who maybe want to do similar work and pursue a similar career path, Do you have any advice for them, especially as these types of things are evolving?
Yeah, yeah. Right. I do think, one of I read a book of the one guy, and he's a crusty Marine Corps general, but he said something that has always stuck in the back of my mind. He basically said, if you haven't read hundreds of books, you're functionally illiterate. Like, oh, that's, how am I doing on my
Well,
reading?
what's my number?
Yeah, right. But it was a challenge, and I would say, right, and I obviously this goes for any area, but the starting point has to be we got to be learning. We got to be ingesting a lot of content. So anyone who's thinking about getting into this work, I'd be like, what are you reading? Are you studying? Are you staying up on what our technical term is evidence-based practice, which is where there's research around what's happening and what's working. And then if you're already in the work, are you staying up to and current? Again, this work, it's really easy to let urgent take over important. And so the value of learning, I would say, is step number one. Yes, if you can go to school like I had the privilege, that's great. So again, I'm thankful for that, but you don't have to have a master's degree to read, to be informed. And so I would be learning, and I would be keeping an eye on what's happening in these different larger systems. But then on a very practical level, I think sometimes one of the best things we can do is start with volunteering. Just go to an organization and get plugged in, see the work that's happening, and then really be able to go, okay, like, could I see myself? Could I see
Yeah.
myself doing this? And really, and as a person of faith, oftentimes we'll talk about calling is really, but I think so for person of faith, it's, hey, what am I called to do? For someone who's maybe not a person of faith, what are my passions? What would make me jump out of bed? Because the work is hard, but a lot of times when people are working in either their passion area or their calling, it's easy, right? Because there's an inner motor that's driving them, that really lets them be able to do it. So learn, start to tip your toe in the water, volunteer, and then really be intentional about what your calling is, what your passion is, and then be able to lean in.
It's really good advice.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned volunteering for people who maybe aren't necessarily pursuing from a career perspective, but do just want to help and give back in their community, maybe through your organization. How can people get involved with you guys?
Yeah, so visit sdrescue.org. We make it super simple. We have a volunteer tab, and we have all of our volunteer opportunities. And yes, of course, we love people to get plugged in with us. A lot of the larger organizations have that opportunity of some way of everyone tries to make it pretty simple. So we have all the way from just serving a meal, so real basic volunteer activity, towards we actually have people who serve as chaplains or people who serve as instructors for our classes. And so there's the whole spectrum of how involved you want to get. But for a lot of people, almost any good not-for-profit organization that has a little bit of size, they're going to have some pretty basic pathway to let you be able to volunteer. But also if you find that really scrappy, smaller, not-for-profit, so just show up and like, do you guys need help? And they'll be like, yes, please. And then they'll throw something at you and you can jump right in.
Always looking for help, it sounds like. Can't hurt.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and telling us just more about the work that you guys do. It's interesting to hear, from just a nonprofit perspective, and homelessness is so relevant in San Diego, but really everywhere. So we appreciate your insight, and thank you so much. We'll definitely have you back on as things continue to change.
Yeah. All right. Great. Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe to our channel, and share it with a friend. And don't forget, the Data Science Alliance is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we would really appreciate your support. You can do a donation, become a member, volunteer with us, or attend an event. We have lots going on all the time here in San Diego, California. Even if you don't live here, though, you can still get involved. So go to our website, datasciencealliance.org. Otherwise, we'll see you here next time on The Data Slice.